without further ado, let me introduce Ben Modell. He is one of the nation's leading silent film accompanists and performs on both piano and theatre organ. He's visiting professor of film studies at Wesleyan University and works full-time presenting and accompanying silent films in a wide variety of venues around the USA and internationally. He's also a resident film accompanist at the Museum of Modern Art in New York and the Library of Congress is Packard Campus Theatre. I love this, your introduction, by the way, Ben, because it goes on and it's all really impressive. His recorded scores are available on DVD and on his YouTube channel, and his indie label, just to add to it, Undercrank Productions, released several discs of rare, lost, or silent films. He's also the producer and co-founder of the Silent Clowns film series, now in its 21st season in New York City. As a film programmer, Ben has co-curated films for the Museum of Modern Art, as archivist of the Ernie Kovacs, Edie Adams collection. He has created 2 recent DVD box sets of Ernie Kovacs television shows and was instrumental in the Library of Congress's acquisition of the Kovacs film and videotape archive. And most relevant to the talk today, he's the founder, along with Steve Masser, of the Silent Comedy Watch Party, a live silent film screening series streamed over YouTube during the COVID pandemic. Ben, welcome.
Thank you, and thanks for putting the link to Undercrank in the chat, where you can order many of our releases. Thanks for having me. Good to see you. I do this because this has become the trademark of the Silent Comedy Watch Party. At the beginning of the show, I wave, and now I tell people when you see me or Steve at a show or somewhere, wave at us. And as in-person shows began to happen, people. I get on the stage and take my bow, and I'd see, maybe a third or a quarter of the house doing this back to me. So I'm Ben Modell. I am a silent film accompanist, historian, and presenter, not necessarily in that order. I've been accompanying silent movies for around 40 years. And I'm here to talk about something called the Silent Comedy Watch Party, which is something that came to me the week before the shutdown as I was walking home from I don't know what, but I was watching in my inbox in the course of about 48 hours, everything I had as far as shows get canceled. So I have a background in filmmaking. I got started playing piano for films when I went to film school. I was a film production major and have always been interested in tech. I got online in 1996, back in the days of dial-up modems. And I don't know if you had anything similar in the UK, but here in the US, we would get CDs, remember CD-ROMs of from AOL every 2 or 3 days with 20 free hours, 50 free hours, please sign up. And a guy I knew who was another independent filmmaker told me about this thing called the internet and email and websites. And I taught myself HTML and put up a website for myself and a fan site for Ernie Kovacs. I was just interested I've always been interested in what the next technology might be, whether it applies to me or not. But I think that looking back, a good deal of what I do isn't so much playing the piano and creating music so I can work, as it is showing silent movies to other people and finding new and different ways of making that happen, instead of waiting to, although it's wonderful when it happens, instead of waiting for a theater or an archive to contact me, to find other ways to make this happen on my own while I'm waiting. And the internet, as I think we've all experienced, has kind of leveled the playing field for many people in the arts and in all other realms, that it's possible to get your work out there. And so in addition to launching a YouTube channel maybe 11 or 12 years ago, posting rare films from my collection that didn't really circulate, which then led to my DVD label, from learning how to author DVDs and just understanding the nuts and bolts of how to get DVDs made and distributed through manufacture on demand, and getting a positive response to that, and learning a lot about promotion and marketing and how to get the word out about things and make a good impression. There are many, many things like this that I found fascinating. And then with social media and all the, I was on Vine for the half an hour that was popular. Remember Vine? It became TikTok eventually, but they're all turning into each other at this point. But I've just found it. I've just been very interested in that sort of thing, and I had poked around as far as understanding how live streaming happened, and for a while there, you had to have X number of viewers on YouTube to pull it off. But then that I whatever that threshold was, I hit it. And a few years before the shutdown, I actually had an idea to do this, to do a silent film show that would be live streamed out of my living room. But I didn't want to do something that was going to encourage people to not come to a theater. That was the concern I had, and I think that's the concern anybody in film distribution or television or streaming has, is, oh my goodness, it's going to, everyone's going to stay home, which to some degree has happened. In some degrees, it's actually helped in-person things. But I was interested in this but held off. And I flew home at the beginning of March 2020, flew home from Lincoln, Nebraska, doing a couple of shows in a tiny, tiny town called Beatrice, which is the town Harold Lloyd was born in, or he was born in Burchard, which is 2 minutes away from it. And we knew something was up. We didn't know what it was. Some of us were being really good about using Purell and avoiding the communal dip at an event, and some of us were just, hugging each other and shaking hands and all this stuff. And then the shutdown hit, and actually the week before the shutdown was announced here, at least in the U.S., I saw something coming, and I was already starting to see things get shut down. And I had this idea, and I had the tech, and I knew how I could do this, and I have this very vivid memory of walking home from somewhere and thinking of a name for the show, and I came up with the name Silent Comedy Watch Party, which seemed to fit. I have since learned that having a name for anything that is more than 3 words makes it very difficult for people to get it right. The stream we've been around for 2.5 years. People still call it the Silent World Party, the Silent Comedy World Party, the Silent Film World Party. I mean, it's just one of those rules of marketing, and I just couldn't boil it down to something shorter. But I came up with the idea. I wanted to do a pilot, and just to see if it would work. And we did a pilot on March 14th or 15th of 2020, doing the whole thing with a video projector, running the films on a wall over my piano. I had an iPhone pointing at me, which my daughter, who was 23 or 4 at the time, operated the camera. My friend Steve Massa came over, and we were very careful. I sat on the piano bench. I spoke a little. I got off the piano bench, went across the room. Steve sat down, did his film intro, got up, went over. I sat back down, and then we would do the thing where we would pan up to the wall and run the film. I would accompany it, and we would come back. All just with the built-in mic on the camera, etc. And then 2 days later, there were 2 things we had to deal with. One is, as soon as we got off the air, so much was already being shut down, and the stress level and fear of people was such that we got an overwhelming response. We had maybe 200 or so people stream in on the pilot. And so many people wrote to us or put comments online saying, thank you so much. I just needed this. Everyone was just so stressed out. And then when the shutdown was announced, I think it was that Tuesday, and we did the show on Sunday, I had to figure out 2 things. One was, how do we continue? Steve can't come over. Our daughter, who was our daughter basically told me, my wife Mana, I'm going to shelter in place with my boyfriend because you're you're elderly. Yeah, she said elderly. That's what, and she went but my daughter was teaching at tap dance at a school with a lot of young kids, and so she was being very cautious, and we thanked her for that, which meant that Mana was now, as she puts it, the accidental camera operator, having never operated a tripod in her life and not being the most tech savvy person. It was now me and Mana, and I had to figure out how to bring Steve in. Again, I figured it out. I'm a long-term improviser, having done improvisational comedy many years ago. I'm a yes and guy, and I thought, instead of going, oh well, I guess we can't do it. I always work from the assumption that this is possible, and let's see how we make it work. So we were able to continue doing the silent comedy watch party. Our friend Marlene Weissman emailed me and said, you need a better logo, because I just typed something and made it graphic. So she created the logo that we're still using today. Mana got good at operating a tripod, and the way we brought Steve in, at least for the first 3 months, was that he FaceTimed onto Mana's iPhone, which I put on a little table mount that I happened to have. And so, as Steve put it, he was like Jambi in the box from Pee-wee's Playhouse. So we would do the thing. Now let's have Steve, and Mana would move her phone into position to pan over. Steve would talk, and vice versa. One of the things that was most important to me, that was very important to me as a facet of this show from day one, and it still is the transition from the screen to me and the transition from the screen into the film. It's something that I remembered from a program here in the U.S. called Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. There were moments where it's a children's program where they would segue into a segment of the show that was done in a land inhabited by humans and hand puppets, but they would zoom into something, there would be a dissolve, and then you would come out the other side. Or they would zoom into a picture frame that had a still image, and they would zoom into that, and then they would dissolve into a film chain of whatever that film segment was. And rather than doing doing something where we just show the film and have me in an insert in the corner, which I wasn't able to do anyway the first time, it was very important to create something in using the language of cinema that replicates what happens to your brain, especially your right brain, at the start of a film show, that the lights go down and you retune your radar and you enter the world of the film, and the film ends, you exit the world of the film and you're back in the theater. And so that we had that from day one. Over the next few months, I found a software which I'm still using called Mimo Live, which is Mac native. There's a few others like OBS Studio and StreamYard, and there's a couple of others. Because the first thing my fellow teachers at Wesleyan University and I discovered is that Zoom is no good for moving image. It's meant for talking heads, and it creates a look with movies and video that's like a bad flip book. So I always wanted to be able to send the feed directly out to the viewers and not just have a camera pointing at the projected image. I wanted to keep the projected image also because it helps me. If I'm looking at a small image, I react musically in a different way than I'm seeing it large on a wall. So I was able to figure that out, and we're still working on little tech glitches here and there. And I can tell you one thing is that if you're, even with Zoom, if you find your image is sputtery, or if you know you have an excellent connection and you get a message saying your internet connection is poor, get an ice pack and put it under your laptop. But I ran wires and here and there. I have a stereo mic that's close mic'd on the piano. I have a lavalier, which you see here for my own audio, a couple of video lights, We got Steve a good webcam. I figured out a way to do that and how to include graphics. So the basic format of the show is that we always go live a few minutes ahead of time. We have an appointment. We show that the show starts at 3 p.m. here, and it's let's see, whatever o'clock that is. That's 8 o'clock, I think, for you. And then when daylight I didn't realize that daylight savings time shifts at different parts, so we would come on earlier and later, and people would miss the show. But one of the things that Mana and I were aware from watching other live streams is that often the stream would come on, but you didn't know if it was really on or not. So we always go live a few minutes ahead of time. I say hello. Mana welcomes people, lets them know that they have time to make some popcorn or get tea going. And then I play a little interlude, and then we go into the body of the show. And each show we show 2 or 3 comedy shorts, silent comedy shorts, which I accompany live on my acoustic piano. In between each of these, I talk a little bit about the film Bring On Steve, which we're either in a split screen or I can cut straight to him using the software. And while he's talking, I'm able to bring up graphics, production stills, trade ads, things like that to help, just so it's not just talking heads. He tosses it back to me. I thank him. I thank the archive or collector we've gotten the film from, and we go through this transition. I ask Mona to get the lights. She gets the lights. I say, now let's watch whatever the film is. I start playing because as an accompanist, I always like to play the audience into the film. This is a tradition with theater organists or cinema organists, as they're called in the UK, and playing music as we transition into the film, as opposed to waiting till the main title card is the screen, which is the practice of a lot of other film accompanists, and then playing people back out. But the most important thing, I think, that we saw from day one, where we thought, oh gosh, well, we have to keep going. And we did continue doing the silent comedy watch party every single week for the first, I think, year and a half, was that it meant so much to people. The fear and the stress level, especially the first several months before we had vaccines, where you were afraid to leave your house. You would have groceries delivered, and then when they, unless you were willing to go out and get them, and then you would get isopropyl alcohol and wipe down everything that you were about to eat, and then wash your hands again. Just the stress level that we went from 0 to 11 very quickly, and the comments we would get from people reflected how much it meant to them. We were hearing from people all over the US, all over Canada, South America, the UK. There was a young woman who I would see, who follows me on Instagram, who lives in Kanazawa, Japan, and I think that's where it is. She would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning on Monday to watch us live. We kept the shows archived for people who couldn't, watch it when we aired. But she made sure she was in front of her laptop or iPad at 4 a.m. on Monday. This is one of the other things that happened, is that my intent with the pilot is to do the pilot and then lock it so nobody can see, because the importance of being there live. But as soon as we ended, Mana said, nobody has anywhere else to go. You have to leave it available. So I reopened the link. I changed it from a private link to a public, and we've done that ever since. And there are people who catch up with the shows later. We hear from people who've just found the show and they've gone back and rewatched every single show. People will rewatch it as soon as we're done to look for certain things. But this was more than an entertainment or a gig. We put this out there for free. This wasn't something I wanted to put behind a paywall or make us a subscription series, because people it was just, nobody was working, nobody was doing anything. We were stuck, and we needed some kind of relief and release. And this is the thing that changed for me. after doing what I do for as many years or even decades that I've been doing it, is that I gained a new understanding of what it meant to be as an entertainer, to provide entertainment for people. And it was more than just the surface stuff that you see, like, hey, good to see you, and all that kind of stuff. Because we went through this moment that we're still going through, where we were really glad to see you, and vice versa. People would write in and say when I wave, and then when Steve waves, they wave back at their television or their computer. We were visiting. I wanted to create something that was the next best thing to going to an in-person show by having live music and doing it on my acoustic piano and not a keyboard, because the keyboard will sound like it's a recording. And I want you to know that this is a real instrument made in 1918 by Baldwin, and it needs to be tuned every once in a while. And every once in a while, I tune it. But it was that human connection that I think was important. And again, this is why the transition in and out of the film was so important. The personal connection of going online early and saying, "We're here, so you can check your audio," and stuff like that. And also there is something about the need for ceremony and ritual as in the human existence, in the human equation, that I think is very important. And we all lost most of that as soon as the shutdown happened. Zoom was great. Boy, I think we all wish we'd bought stock in Zoom in February of 2020 on a whim. And then, but the thing, as great as Zoom is that if you go visit somebody, or if you go to a pub or a picnic, you enter the space. There's a slow transition. You see one person, you see somebody else, you sit down, blah, 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 blah. When it's time to go, okay, there's the round. You know, you of saying goodbyes to people. You go and maybe you run into somebody as you're walking to your car and you go home. With Zoom, you're there. And then, okay, bye, mom, click. And there's something jarring about that. So I, as much as we could, we wanted to do things the same way. I tried to come up with catchphrases, not in a shticky kind of way like Saturday Night Live tries to find catchphrases so they can make t-shirts and movies out of it, but because, I mean, I became very aware of needing that routine. You know, when you listen to a podcast, the podcast host will greet you the same way every time, and when they change something, it either throws you, or there's just something reassuring and familiar about that. And so doing, you know, waving at people, you know, wishing them well at the end of the show, just the routine of going into and out of the film. Steve came up with the idea of recommending DVDs and books to people, because he called his cabin fever recommendations, and we still call it that. And what's happened now is that in going back to in-person shows, I've gotten to meet people who have been watching the show all the time. I see Darlene Jacob is on this call, and she's in Kansas. I think, Darlene, you're one of the people who discovered the show somewhere in the run and then went back and watched every episode. I watched you post comments. And when I went to the Kansas Silent Film Festival this past February, I got to meet Darlene, and a lot of people waved at me. One thing that we did in the December of 2020, I encouraged Marlene to set up a merch shop online for people to buy T-shirts and whatever you could get through Redbubble. The way it's set up, you don't really make a lot of money, but one of the things that I realized is from the connections we all had with one another through this regularly scheduled event that was live, and even if you watched it later, it still felt like you were visiting with us. More than beyond the way merch might be sold at a show as a way to make money, I I also realized that the show really meant something to people. And as a fan of something, you might want to have a mug or a clock or a throw pillow with the logo on it. I see a lot of silent comedy watch party T-shirts that shows masks with the logo. People have sent in photos of the mug that they've gotten. But it's just, it means so much more, and it means something different. And people have written in and told us about, multiple people have told us about hardships that they've been through. There was one of our regular viewers in Canada. The first time I used the in my sign-up, I said, we hope this helps you get through what you're going through, because I knew people were suffering. I didn't know what. And I heard from this person that they had lost someone very close and dear to them a few months before, and watching the shows and laughing really helped them. And that's so much different from going down to the Museum of Modern Art and playing for a Buster Keaton film or a Douglas Fairbanks film. It's just, although I do think there is something about silent film that takes you out of your reality in a way that maybe gaming does and virtual reality does, but standard cinema today with the 3D and CGI and surround sound, just pushes you back in your seat. So I gained a new understanding of providing entertainment for other people, and we've done shows with other venues, live streams, feature films with art houses around the U.S., as well as we've done 2 shows for the Slapstick Festival in Bristol, which was a lot of fun to do. Not only to get to do something like that with the festival, but the second time we did a program for the Slapstick Festival, we did something I had wanted to do for such a long time, which was, in addition to streaming the show into people's homes, it was streamed directly into the Watershed Cinema in Bristol, UK. And there were, I don't know, 50, 60, 70 people there watching Edward Everett Horton comedy shorts, as well as my and Steve's introduction to them as an audience in a cinema. I've always wanted to try and do that. So through harnessing 21st century technology in a moment of panic when I wasn't really thinking, oh, I'll invent this thing, I was really the first person to take the silent film experience online. A few other people followed doing this sort of thing. I'm still doing it. There was a moment at the end of 2021 where I think halfway through 2021 we moved down to doing shows every other week because I was starting to get in-person bookings. And Steve and I and Mana and Susan were talking after one of the streams and thought, well, yeah, maybe it's December and things are getting better, so we can do shows once a month now. And then Thursday, after that Sunday, the next round of variants kicked in, and we were like, no, no. And so we held off going down to once a month. And because it's once a month and we're not every week hammering on social media and emails, here's our show, here's what we're showing, sometimes people wondering, are you continuing to do this? Well, actually, what people say, are you still? And if you're in the arts, please, we hear, are you still a lot? Are you? Yes, we're continuing to do this because we've connected. I feel like I've created a small movie theater that doesn't have a physical footprint, and we have regulars who are there at every stream. There are people who are discovering us. There are people who can't make it every time, but the Cinema Arts Center, which is an art cinema on Long Island here in the suburbs of New York, one of the first venues to say, oh, this is working for you with the watch party. Can we do this also? And I said, sure. And so that monthly series only went dark for 3 months. I've been doing it since 2006. We've continued on, but we did a show Within Our Gates, the Oscar Michaud film, in February of 2021 for Black History Month. We had a special guest speaker, Professor William Jennings from Hofstra University. And during the Q&A, there's somebody in, I think, Poland or Hungary who asked a few questions. So there's somebody, Leticia Magalhaes, who's in South America, who watches every show. She has posts something on Letterboxd about every single film we've shown, and she keeps track of, hey, Ben and Steve, you know, this is your 250th short, stuff like that. I just got an email from a family who had come to the Silent Clowns film series before the pandemic and had since moved to Israel to be closer to family. But they and their young sons, who are now age 7 and 4, I think, continued watching the watch party because the kids were bringing the parents initially, but they were watching in Israel. So it's not a huge number of people who watch, and I'm fascinated by the fact that we hit this one number and it kind of just hovers in a range, and it hasn't continued to snowball. But for me, the most important thing is to give the people who do tune in as good a show as possible. They get what it is, and I think a lot of people, like with silent film in general and regular screenings, if you haven't seen it, it's really hard to understand it, what the big deal is. And if you haven't watched a live stream silent film show, at least the way I do it, where I try to emphasize that connection between me and the viewer and the viewer and the film, where most of the other live streams, you know, you'll have the film and a corner insert of the pianist. You know, that once you've seen it, you know, you really get that connection, that there's a difference between watching something that's pre-recorded and watching something that's live. I think that's all the points I wanted to make. But we are going to continue doing the watch party at least for now, once a month. If something should happen and we have to go back to doing it the other way, we know how to do it. The show would not happen without my wife Mana here in our apartment, Steve's wife Susan, Marlene Weissman, who does our graphics, and our associate producer Crystal Kai. You know, we're all in different places, but we're all working together to make these things happen, and which is why on the first and the second anniversary shows, I, you know, wrestled with the technology to make a 4-way split screen and to be able to bring everybody on so everyone could see. You know, people have heard Mana's voice off camera for, you know, a couple of years, to the point that one of the first in-person shows I did up in Brattleboro, Vermont, before the show, somebody heard Mana talking with me and recognized her voice and went up to her and said, I know you're going to tell me I have time to make some popcorn before we start, aren't you? And we've had that happen a few times. People get to see Mana, get to see Susan and Crystal and her husband James and their daughter Lily, and put faces to all the names that Steve and I are thinking every time. And we couldn't do it without the people who watch, whether we hear from everybody or not. It's something that's kept us going. The show was an anchor for us and for viewers during that time in the first year where you just never knew what day it was. But if you knew, you got an email from me, oh, the Silent Comedy Watch Party, it's in 2 days. Okay, mark your calendar. But hearing from other people who watch the show and just looking at the number of views, and I always add 30 to 40% because I know there's a lot of couples and families who watch. So 250 views could really mean 326 people. But meeting people who watch the show and coming up to me and to Steve and telling us how much it's meant to them, you know, has really been so moving and so rewarding for me and for everybody who works on the show. And so I want to thank David and Richard and everybody else here for having me on.